we were done with Narnia. But Narnia is not done with you. Throughout the Advent season of 2023 and Christmas Eve, we had Narnia-themed sermons. We were doing different members of the congregation, led by our own dear Eliza, showed us different connections between the Pevensey children and other Christians and Christian types that exist. And in case you didn't see, hear, witness any of those sermons, I'll very quickly go over what we learned. We learned Aslan represents Jesus. That Peter is the leader despite his fear. Susan is the skeptic whose questions lead her to believe in marvelous things. Edmund is the criminal redeemed. And Lucy is the joyful believer whose faith bolsters others. Which one of these four children represents you? Which one of these four heroes represents me? None of them. I learned that a long time ago. I was in the 4th grade, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe Disney movie, live action, had either just come out or was about to come out. My teacher, Mrs. Fishman, read to us Professor C.S. Lewis's work just before the Christmas break. She closes the book on that very last chapter and asks the whole classroom, which of the 4 Pevensey children represents you? And in true 4th grader fashion, everyone started assigning a character to someone else. So-and-so was Peter because he was great at basketball and was always team captain in PE. So-and-so was Lucy because she was just so happy all the time. Omar was Edmund. Nobody liked Omar. And then it was my turn, and a boy, not Omar, points at me and says, Shannon is the White Witch because she's bossy. Well, he was right. I was bossy. But I wasn't evil, so I knew that wasn't right. Mrs. Fishman diverted, said, oh, Shannon does archery. She's been going to archery tournaments, so she's Susan. And another girl was like, oh, no, she's Lucy because she plays imaginary games, so on and so forth. The class moved on. I didn't. Why was it that comparing me to the 4 Pevensey children felt like wearing ill-fitting shoes on the wrong feet? Why? Because Aslan represents Jesus. No, we didn't discuss it in my 4th grade public classroom. My parents had taught me that. Years before I heard that book in 4th grade, my parents had read it to me and my sister, and they taught us the allegorical, yes, they used the word allegorical, connections between The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Holy Scripture. I grew up surrounded by the knowledge of Christ, taught by 2 very faithful believers. Some of my earliest memories are of me waking up from a nightmare and my father holding me and praying the nightmare away. Of my mother belting out the doxology in the shower so loud the whole house and our neighbors could hear. I understood the importance of Reformation Sunday, go Martin Luther, long before I ever looked forward to summer break. My identity was formed, heavily influenced by the knowledge of Jesus Christ. So the four Pevensey children, though, they didn't know about Aslan until they were fully formed individuals. By the time they have gone to Narnia, met Aslan, it is well established that Lucy is the truth teller and a sweetheart, and Edmund is a bit of a jerk and definitely a liar between the two. So no, I did not connect with any of the four children. I did not connect with them because Aslan represents Jesus. I knew who Jesus was all my life, and they in the book had just met Aslan. So, I did not connect with the four heroes of Narnia. And since I did not connect with the four heroes of Narnia, due to my already established knowledge of Christ, my already established faith in Christ, that meant I am no hero. My faith brings no glory to the kingdom of heaven, and my testimony brings no light to darkened hearts. What a disheartening conclusion. For years, I stood in the shadow of this conclusion, watching the testimonies of Peters, people who had recently come to the faith and accepted roles of leadership in different churches and ministries, of Susans like my parents. Yes, my parents were skeptics. They did not always believe, but their questions led them to understand how miraculous this world was, so they believed. I watched Edmunds, the recovered addicts, the reformed criminals, the prodigals, speak of their redemption with such power and such faith that they led others to redemption as well. I met people like our own dear Eliza, whose joy recalls to me Lucy Pevensey. And I sat in that darkness and believed that the only person who cared about my existence was God. But there was nothing useful for me to do, because I believed I was no hero. Believed. Past tense. What changed? I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe again. I read it on my own. And I came to a realization. Another one. There are more than four heroes in Narnia. Of course, Aslan is another hero. The four children are nothing without him. And by nothing, I mean they are no heroes without him. It is a prophecy about him coming. And then there are four children as well. Aslan is the one who teaches Peter the strategy that helps win the day at the Battle of the Stone Table. Aslan's sacrifice, taking the punishment instead of Edmund, who had betrayed his family to the White Witch. So why Edmund lives. Aslan is why Susan and Lucy are able to go and get reinforcements for the battle at the Stone Table. Without Aslan, they would not have survived. So he's a hero. Are there any more? Yes. The first one who comes to mind is Mr. Tumnus the Faun. When we meet him, It is a beautiful snowy day in Narnia. Lucy has just found herself coming through the woods, and he is carrying a package of brown paper-wrapped parcels as if they were Christmas presents. He has his umbrella and his red scarf. He takes one look at her and goes, "Are you a daughter of Eve? Are you a human child?" He's completely shocked, completely amazed by this fact. She says, "Well, of course I am. What else would I be?" And he's like, "I don't know, a dwarf maybe?" Well, they befriend each other. He takes her to his home, a nice, cozy little cave. And they have tea. And in that cave is a bookshelf. And on that bookshelf is a title that reads, "Is Man Real?" He doubted that humans existed. Towards the end of the afternoon tea party, he breaks down in tears, telling her that he is a terrible, awful, no-good fawn. She's like, "Of course you're not Mr. Tumnus." And he goes, "Oh, if you had known what I had done." And she's like, "Well, tell me." So he tells her that there's this being, the White Witch, who rules Narnia. She is the reason why it is always winter and never Christmas. She has been looking for the sons and daughters of Eve for a very long time. And in exchange for his peaceful, cozy little life, all he had to do was make her one little promise. Should he ever come across a son or daughter of Eve, he would take that child to her home. But he knows she's no good. His father had taught him so. He says that by making this deal with the White Witch, he had betrayed everything his father had ever taught him to value. Mr. Tumnus is happy and content with his life, this innocent little deal that he'll never have to fulfill until, boom, he meets Lucy Pevensey, a daughter of Eve. And he cannot bring himself to turn her into the White Witch because he had never thought he would meet someone so kind and sweet as her. How could he possibly take her to the White Witch's house to face a terrible fate? Yes, he is the worldly doubter turned believer. In the Old Testament, comparable figures are Joseph of the coat of many colors, brothers. The brothers were raised in the faith, and they knew that prophecy dreams were a thing. Their brother was telling them about the prophecy dreams, and they were like, "We don't like this, you're being a bit of a jerk." Sold into slavery, faked his death so their dad would be sad. And then boom, famine. And then boom, they're in Egypt, and boom, there's Joseph, alive and well, and he feeds them and ensures the survival of their people. In the New Testament, a doubter turned believer is James, brother of Christ. The way it goes in Scripture is James was part of the 12 apostles, but mostly to keep an eye on his brother. He thought his brother was crazy. He was like, there is no way my brother, whom I grew up with, I watched him grow, is the Messiah, the Son of God. Not happening. And then, boom, death and resurrection. And James goes on to found very important early congregations of the Christian faith. In today's world, Mr. Tumnuses are those of us who grew up surrounded by the knowledge of Christ, of the Gospels, and for one reason or another, didn't believe until a boom, cataclysmic moment happened. Am I a Mr. Tumnus? No, Now, Mr. Tumnus doubted what his father had taught him until he had that cataclysmic moment of meeting Lucy. I have always believed. Yes, I have had my faith struggles. I have had my problematic moments in my relationship with God. But I never doubted his existence. And I never doubted why Jesus came. So no, I am not Mr. Tumnus. Are you Mr. Tumnus? If so, you are a hero too. Mr. Tumnus is the one who tells Lucy of the dangers in Narnia, that it's not the winter wonderland she believes it to be, that it is a land entrapped and enslaved by the White Witch. He tells her of the dangers to her life, and he guides her safely back to the lamppost so she might return to her family. She visits him a total of 2 times. Both times he guides her safely home. And for his trouble, he is arrested by the White Witch's wolves, the captain of her police force. He is taken to her home and joins her garden of statues. See, the White Witch had this power to cast a spell and to turn any living being into a stone-cold statue, imprisoning them till she released the spell. She never releases the spell. She has these statues all over her home, in the courtyard, up the stairs, in her throne room, bedrooms, kitchens. Every single room of her house has at least one prisoner encased in stone. These are the warriors fallen for a righteous work. Many of them, especially those in the courtyards, were part of the first rebellion against her, trying to stop her usurpation of the thrones of Narnia. And they failed. In the Old Testament, they are like the slaves in Egypt, the firstborn children, and the firstborn Hebrew sons and their parents, who suffered under the command for them all to die. In the New Testament, or also in the Old Testament, they are like those who are exiled to Babylon and killed for their faith, or thrown into a fire of some sort. In the New Testament, they are early Christians martyred by people like Saul turned Paul. And in today's world, outside of countries like America, where we are allowed to believe what we believe, there are martyrs still. But here in America, where we are allowed to believe what we want to believe, there are still those who are trapped in stone. Maybe you started a ministry and it failed. You have seen the death of a church, the doors closing. Perhaps you are struggling with health, physical, mental, or are isolated for other reasons. Yes, you are trapped. You are a warrior fallen for a righteous work. And still, you are heroes. The slaves were brought out of Egypt. The boys thrown into the fire. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego are saved. And the church grew, despite the efforts of those like Saul turned Paul. Some of you have already been released from the stone. Maybe that ministry that failed led to you starting another one. maybe you have been healed. No matter where you are in that journey, whether you are entrapped or freed, you are a hero too. See, Edmund makes a deal with the White Witch. So the second time Lucy goes to Narnia, Edmund also ended up in Narnia. Edmund meets the White Witch. She uses her magic to addict him to Turkish delight and she convinces him and she lies to him that she is going to make him king of Narnia and his brother and sisters will become courtiers for her. It's all a lie. She intends to do away with them. They are a threat to her power. So, she is a bit mean. There are streaks of cruelty that show to Edmund, but until he goes to her house, he convinces himself that she is good. Goes into her house, he sees all of those statues, and that's when he realizes she really is a bad person and he has made the wrong choice. Very much so. But not only are they what wake Edmund up and help him to realize the truth. Later in the story, Aslan, Susan, and Lucy go to the White Witch's house. Aslan revives everyone, and they become the reinforcements that are crucial in the Battle of the Stone Table. And without them, the battle would have been lost. The White Witch would have continued her reign. Spring and summer would never have returned to Narnia without those fallen warriors. Are you trapped in stone? Have you been released from stone? Am I trapped? Have I been released? Instead of ill-fitting shoes on the wrong feet, now it's right-fitting shoes on the wrong feet. It's close, but the comparison's not quite there. So, I continued my search, my comparison. Next up are the resistors, quiet yet steadfast in their faith. It's the Beavers. I love the Beavers. Mr. and Mrs. Beaver are great. Mr. Tumnus, before his capture by the White Witch, somehow managed to get a message to Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and went, "Hey, I've met a daughter of Eve. She has siblings. They fit the profile. I need you to keep a lookout for them in case I'm ever captured." Now, there's something we have to remember about Narnia. Time dilation is a thing. When Lucy goes and has her first tea party with Mr. Tumnus, an entire day goes by. Hours upon hours. Yet when she comes back to our world, it's only been a few seconds. We realize in other books in the series that 1 year in our world is 1,000 years in Narnia. So, between Lucy's first meeting with Mr. Tumnus and her second meeting with Mr. Tumnus, there are several days. Then, between Edmund and Lucy being in Narnia, the second meeting with Mr. Tumnus, and then all 4 children arriving, it's been about a month, maybe a month and a half. So, in Narnia terms, this is weeks, months, even years have gone by since Mr. Tumnus told Mr. and Mrs. Beaver the children are real. So here are Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. They're living in a dam that they have made within a 30-minute walk of the White Witch's house. A 30-minute beaver walk of the White Witch's house. They don't like her. They believe Aslan is real. When Mr. Tumnus told them about the sons and daughters of Eve, they're like, well, of course you met one. There's no doubt in our minds. They never once doubted his story. They have always believed. And yet they live in some comfort of their own making, within the shadow of the witch's house. They make me think of John chapter 15, verses 18 to 19. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me, Jesus, first. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Of the world is Mr. Tumnus before Lucy. In the world is the Beavers, always. They have lived in the White Witch's shadow all their lives. They have always believed, and yet they exist and they're fine because they are quiet yet steadfast in their faith. They have never liked her, but they have never been so loud in their rebellion that she would imprison them, because they knew someone had to stay, so that way the children would be safe. The children come to Narnia. They find that Mr. Tumnus's house has been ransacked. They see the warrant saying that he has been arrested, and it is Mr. Beaver who guides them to safety. He tells them to stay quiet, and once they are safe and sound in his home with his wife, he and his wife then tell them the prophecies of Aslan, who when he shakes his mane, spring will come again, and that there are 4 empty thrones at Cair Paravel that they are meant to fill. They nourish them, tend to them. They are the ones who teach them about Aslan. In the Old Testament, they would have been the parents who passed on the traditions, but hid themselves, yet still believed. They would have been the parents that passed down the traditions in Egypt and in the Babylonian captivity. In the New Testament, they would have been those early Christians who did not stand on the street corners and go, "Let me tell you of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ." They would have been those ones who knelt in the sand, talking with someone, and when the time felt right, would have drawn half of a fish to see the other person would draw the rest of the symbol. What about today? Well, today, they are those in church who open the door with a big smile on their face to welcome people in. Or those who bake cookies so that there's always something sweet to eat. People who put together the Advent goodie bags. Or run the food bank in the community, and they make sure no one goes hungry. Are you one of the Beavers? Me, I'm Mrs. Beaver. I love her so much. Mrs. Beaver sews, I sew. Mrs. Beaver always wants to make sure people have food. I also like feeding people. When they're like, "Oh, Edmund has left the dam, and he has gone to the White Witch's house, and he has betrayed us. We must hurry to the stone table." Mrs. Beaver goes, "But first, we need to pack." She ensures that they have plenty of provisions, and as they are journeying, they meet Father Christmas, get some supplies, things of that nature. And she goes, "Man, I wish I had brought pillows since we're camping. It would have been much better if we had brought pillows." That's me. You see me at a fencing tournament, I have a cot with a pillow, and I let everyone sleep on it. I go to the movies, I take a blanket with me. I'm Mrs. Beaver straight up. And she's a hero. She and Mr. Beaver are why the kids make it to the stone table. They're why they know about Aslan. If I'm Mrs. Beaver, then I'm a hero too. You're a hero too. Those of us who have always believed, despite what the world says to us. I have been told, oh, Shannon, your parents brainwashed you. You don't really believe. Your faith doesn't count because you have always believed. My parents did not brainwash me. When I confirmed at the age of 13, it was after I had spent a life, my early life, studying other religions. My parents encouraged me to learn all I can and all I could about other faiths so I would know if I wanted to follow in the faith they had committed to. My parents did that right. And to this day, I still study other faiths, other religions. I still ask questions because I am in this world and I want to understand it. But I am not of this world. And I will resist the bad parts of this world, as I always have, quietly, yet steadfastly. And you can too. You do not have to stand on the street corners. You can just provide a safe place. And that is heroic indeed. But what if you're thinking to yourself, Shannon, I don't connect with the four Pevensey children, Mr. Tumnus, the statues, the prisoners, or the beavers. There's one more. The professor. Oh, the professor. The reclusive who is occasionally contracted to work. See, in our world, at the beginning of the story, we learn that the children have moved to the country into a stranger's home because of the bombings of London, the Blitz. They have moved to the countryside to be safe. Their father is a soldier. Their mother is still in London. The professor is an older man with a large house. And he decides to take the children in because he has the space. But he's not very much a attentive, nurturing, fatherly figure. He's just there, kind of like a window or a piece of furniture. He's there. Now, when Lucy had first visited Narnia, came back, her siblings all assumed she was playing. She was very, very upset that they didn't believe her. Then the second time to Narnia, Edmund had also gone, and she was very excited because she's like, yo, my brother's going to back me up, and he's going to confirm that this place is real. And when they come back to our world, and Edmund and Lucy are talking to Peter and Susan, Edmund straight up decides to lie and say, I was just playing along with my sister. So, the professor hears about Peter and Susan's concerns. That, why is Lucy suddenly lying? And he goes, that isn't very logical of you. If your brother is the established liar and your sister is the established truth teller, then Lucy must be telling the truth. And that conversation is what spurs Susan and Peter to join Lucy and Edmund in trying to find Narnia. The professor opens his home to 4 displaced children. He encourages the children to believe the evidence of their own experiences. They go off. They become heroes. They rule a country for years. And when they come back to our world, he says to them, well, of course Narnia is real and you didn't imagine it. I've been there too. He brings to mind the missionaries who have retired. People who used to go out into the world and experience all these amazing, crazy things. But they're tired. They've retired. They have their homes. They have their comforts. If you are that person and you are longing for those old days, thinking that you no longer bring glory to the kingdom of heaven, that you are no longer a hero because you are home in comfort, that's wrong. You are a hero still. You just don't go out to do the saving. Those who need help come to you. You have earned your reward. You have earned the comfort. Please enjoy it. In conclusion, in Narnia, all of us, no matter who we connect with from the book or who we connect with in Scripture, we would all be heroes. And in this world, your testimony is cherished. God is proud of you. And that's it. I hope that this new year treats you all well, that you rest if you need it, and go forth if you're called. Thank you.